Another thing about doing, so like if you do the things exactly the way I tell you, you can describe to me over the phone what's going on, and if I know you're doing exactly what you've been shown, I'll be able to figure out what's wrong. And once that goes away and you start creating your own stuff, we're now speaking a different language. I can't be helpful. Even if I'm in the room, I might not be able to make sense of what you've done, how you've gotten to wherever it is you are. And so, like all of these things, it's not a matter of just being tightly wound and going, well, you have to do it my way. There's a reason for it. I actually talk about this with the reason that you require, in order to learn how to make art, you have to study realism. Have you ever seen that video or heard that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I do not.
No. Okay, so I'll explain it to you. In an education, you have an education in knowledge, right? Guided experience, and then of course your commitment, and all of those three things, they come together, and they are what they basically equal what you produce. If you're trained properly, the person who watches over you does their job while you are getting your experience, and you commit to the work, you'll get your result. So the reason that realism is absolutely necessary in an education is that if I'm a teacher and I teach you how to paint, and I put an apple up on the table, and you paint it abstractly, you decide not that red, not that tall, you want to make it rounder, the stem this way instead of that way. So I teach you, I give you the education and knowledge. But when I come back to be a guide to look over your work, to give you that experienced guide, looking at your stuff and course correcting you and showing you where there are errors or issues, if you've just painted what you want, how do I know what your intent was? Did you mean to make it, 3% less red? I don't know that. But if you are faithfully trying to represent what you see up there and you can't get the color red right, I know why, I know what's wrong. If your proportions are wrong, I can see they're wrong. But if you're just drawing, using that as a point of departure to start, to create something else, I don't know what your intent is. For all I know, you are wildly wrong or perfect. I would have no idea as an instructor offering you that guided experience to be able to assess what you're doing and guide you. And so realism, what it does is it forces us in the education to all have the same goal while we're learning, right? The standard is set on the table. That apple is a certain shape with a certain shadow shape, certain light shape, the color is such, all of those things. As long as you're faithfully trying to reproduce them, I can then look and see where your strengths and weaknesses are, what you understand and what you don't. It's the only way for me to know. The moment that opinion starts creeping into it, from the standpoint of the artist, you start taking artistic license of any kind, I have no idea whether or not you're doing what you intend. And of course, everybody will say, no, that's exactly what I meant to do. But is it? Or is it just that, you weren't capable of doing what you wanted and this was good enough, right? But that's not how you learn, it's not how you grow. You grow by pushing yourself to be better. We would naturally take the easy way out. It's easy enough to say. I mean, it's ego. It's saving ourselves from having to do more work. Say, well, yeah, it's exactly what I intended, whether it is or not. I think that would be a very natural thing to do. All right, so when we do our admixtures here, I want to start off with try to be as close to equal amounts of paint as possible. But we want to make sure, regardless of how much paint we put in, when we're done, that this value sits beautifully between these, that it looks like a middle ground. If it's not a middle ground, it's not going to work. If it's too dark, it'll blend easily with this, but still be a fist fight over here. So I want to make sure as a value, it looks like it fits between the two, and make sure it's well mixed. clean my knife every time I grab paint, so I'm not contaminating anything.
That would have been really bad if we started recording.
You what?
That would have been really bad if we started recording. Like that.
So from here, what we're trying to do is create a fade between this shade and this shade. If we just rub these together, and rub and rub and rub and rub until we get a fade, what we're actually doing is it's not a fade, what we're doing is we're getting additional values through the blending of the two originals. In order to do this, we have to create something in the blending that fits between them. Now, in the case between this one and this one, right, our extreme shadow and a moderate light, our moderate shadow is that shade. So it makes sense, instead of just pushing the paint around, we can just take this and put it in place, right? It now halves the distance that we have to blend, right? Jumping from this shade to this shade it's a big value jump. And so if the value jump is that big, it's harder to make the edge dissolve. But if we can get the values closer together, like a jump from here to here is hard to blend, but this from here to here, not so bad. From here to here is not so bad.
And so when you're placing the buffer, you just do like a straight line?
Well, I don't want to make it straight. I want it to be kind of messy around the edges. It should look like torn fabric, right? And the reason is that on the far ends of the spectrum, you have a gradient on one side and a razor sharp linear mark on the other, right? A straight line on one side and then a blurred edge on the other. Those are the farthest ends of the spectrum, right? So if we put a straight line here with sharp edges, we are starting all the way over here, and then we're going to try to drag it to here. But if we can create a kind of tattered edge, it's not out here on the spectrum. It's really kind of moving in the direction. We don't have to travel so far to get this to turn into a gradient.
So how do you create that tattered edge whenever you're putting it down?
When I put the buffer down, I don't worry about the outer edge as I put it down. Just like that. It doesn't have to be sharp. I don't want to make it. I don't want it to be straight up and down. I want to make sure I don't have any blobs of paint around the outsides, but I just kind of break the edge up as I go. Now, it's still sharp, but it's not a straight line. And our eye tracks straight lines. Things that meander don't feel like an edge the same way that something that is linear does. And if something is kind of really roughed out, this doesn't feel like a line where this one does.
So how would you do it when you're working like in a really small space, like a really small gradient?
Just make it smaller. Same exact thing, but you just make it smaller. When you think about all the paintings you've done, what's the smallest gradient you've done?
Yeah, it's really, really small.
Like a apple stem?
Yeah,
so
like the apple stem.
go down to a small enough brush. Use the thickness of the brush to, right? You have to be able to, look, I mean, let's imagine that I'm doing an apple stem. Let's say that that's the apple stem. Realistically, I'm not making a gradient in there. That's never gonna happen. I might be able to get like from here to here, like I put this one up, but from here to here, I might get this down in between. In fact, let me kind of redo that. So if this is our apple stem, a light and a shadow, I might be able to get this down in between. That's about all I'm gonna manage. I'm not creating a real gradient in an area so fine.
Mm-hmm.
right?
So then you would just lay it down.
I'd be careful about it, but I would basically, if this is your stem and this is your break line between your shadow and your light, I would just put down the buffer and stop. You're not gonna get out here and get this and still have a shadow and a light in place. You wipe them out in the process.
Yes, I have noticed that happens.
Yeah, so the brush only fits into so many spaces, and you can get to smaller brushes, but like you start getting into these brushes that are like one hair, you don't need that kind of detail in your work. It's not necessary. This, if I have an apple here and the shadow is clear and the light is clear and there's a nice gradient here, that is enough to do the job. Because your brain says, okay, well the light's over here, the shadows are all on this side, everything that's round has a gradient. Like this, as long as this doesn't look like a razor sharp edge, that's all you need. I mean, that feels like a gradient. The difference between this and this. That feels like a gradient. It's all it has to do. It just has to feel like one when you look at it. In big open areas, like on an apple, you can't cheat so much. You can't hint at it and get the impression. You have to be a little bit more particular. So anyway, so once I get here, I've got my extreme shadow and my moderate light as a starting point. I've now got my buffer down. From here, if I just rub this edge together gently, I start to get my gradient. Right? I mean, these two shades are pretty close together. So here, they blend pretty readily. Same on the other side. If I blend over here, just kind of touch this edge, it disappears. I mean,
So
it
are
really
there
just
different
blends.
brush strokes that you should be using in comparison to the ones that you just taught us earlier?
Well, I'm basically using this brush stroke. I'm making an adjustment to it.
Oh, okay.
But instead of doing this, I'm basically changing and doing this. The same thing, same brush stroke. Right, so you can see in here, like, that's a gradient down there. If I cover this, look at that gradient. Right, that's pretty smooth. And I just rubbed this shadow into the buffer, this light into the buffer. But what I've in effect done by rubbing this into this is created this shade in between them. That's all I've done. By rubbing these two together, they mix, and by mixing, they create this shade. So instead of just smudging them together over there, if I take this shade on my brush, a very small amount, there's almost nothing here, I can soothe this edge. Because I don't have to push it around so much to get it to dissolve, because I'm also applying the shade that comes from the two of them being mixed together. Now, it might take more than one pass, but that's okay. I mean, that's pretty good gradient over there. On the other side, again, if I rub these two together, it dissolves. But what I'm in effect doing is creating this shade. So if I have this on my brush, again, small amount, I'm not making heavy marks, small amount of paint.
And so why do you recommend that we never use a dry brush when we're painting?
Dry brushes lift paint, right? So if you have paint down and you use a dry brush, you wind up lifting some of the paint that was already down, right? It's a clean gradient. Right, and this is a hard jump from what looks like black into grays. This is easy, like relatively speaking, they're all grays. Again, so here, put the buffer down. And again, the buffer's got to be solid. I can't see through it. It's got to be the same shade, top to bottom, left to right. Right? Solid. It has to look like that before you start. If it's not, well, even when you dissolve the outer edges, it's going to be all kinds of chaos going on in here. We want smooth and quiet. Again, from here, if I just rub this edge together, look at it dissolve. That's this into this. But what I'm in effect doing is creating this shade. So if I have a little bit of this on the brush, it just soothes the edge and makes it easier to break down. I mean, look at it. It's just like completely dissolved.
Yeah, and if it was a straight line, it would be.
I'd still be able to break it up, but it just becomes more work. Again, rub these two together, These are a bit more of a jump, but they blend. But again, what I'm doing is I'm stripping away paint. Every time I touch it, I'm lifting paint. So better to apply more paint. Again, I can't go very far. The moment I see that I'm becoming ineffective, I want a little bit, I'll grab more paint. Sometimes it goes a little further than others. And again, I try to vary. I don't want to go straight up and down because I'll start establishing an edge. I want this to vary. So the marks are, they're all over the place. Right? Again, even at this point, if I decide it's too choppy, I can now just kind of pull everything in one direction. And I'm being very gentle. I'm skimming the surface of the painting. But I can just pull it and it'll soften. But again, I'm not heavy-handed. Like this is like the other day you were like,
how do you pull it without contaminating it? Like,
well, you
with
can't go
what you
from here
have?
to here or here to here. All you're doing is, the brush, you see the bristles, they don't even bend. I'm basically like this gentle. See the brush, it doesn't even bend. No force at all. That's all. Again, the last one, between these two, this is pretty easy. These are already kind of bumped up against each other on the palette. They blend pretty readily. Seems almost like, why bother with a buffer? But even this, like I could put this buffer down and I could probably create the gradients without going back for any other paint. Right, I don't have to go back and do anything. I can just drop that in. And then just kind of pull the brush. That's all you need for a gradient. It doesn't need to be any smoother than that. If you get it too smooth, it looks sanitized. It doesn't feel natural.
So when you pull the paint, you also make sure that it's not dry, right?
It has to be. You can't move wet, dry paint. It has to be wet.
Okay.
You shouldn't be working wet paint on dry paint.
Okay.
Wet paint on wet paint, that's it. And so as you work on things, if you have 3 objects, paint one object, start to finish. Paint the next object, start to finish. Paint the next object, start to finish. That way you do your shadow, you do your light, you do your gradient, reflections, highlights, it's done. Then you move to your next object. That way if you run out of time, you finish the thing you're working on and you're fine. Then the next day you just pick up where you left off. But don't stop in the middle, like don't fill a shadow and a light and stop, because you can't blend that, you can't create a blended edge. You have to repaint everything to get the painting staged to be able to create a gradient. So, but this is basically all making a gradient is, and you can see it's not that complicated, but you do have to pay attention to what you're doing with the brush. Again, when you do this, no pressure. The brush should just touch the surface of the canvas when you're softening everything. Remember that it's step downs. So this gradient is a moderate shadow, then an admixture, then a moderate light, and an admixture, and then an extreme light. It's a 5-value gradient. There are 5 values that make this. If we just took the shadow and the light and rubbed them together, it's a 2-value gradient, and we're trying to create the other 3 values just by smudging. But you wind up with a mess when you do that. In order to get a painting that looks rich and vibrant, the gradients have to have a good amount of paint in them. So you want to make sure that at the end, the density of this area is the same as the density of the things around it. The shadows and the lights and the gradient are all about the same thickness. If you just rub the edge together, you wind up with more paint in the shadow and light and less in the gradient, where for richness, it's most necessary. The gradients require paint in order to transition smoothly. So the more paint you put down, the more buttery and kind of rich the gradients feel. Obviously, I don't want you loading up the paintings. We want to keep them nice and thin for now. Any questions about this? good?
I'm good.
Makes sense?
Yes.
You see things you're doing wrong?
Yes.
Okay. See things you're doing wrong?
Yeah.
Yes. No, we took care of this already for you.
Yeah, I'm still doing them the way that you told me to, and I think I've been doing okay.
Good. Well, you would know if you're struggling with them, you're not doing them right.
Yeah.
Once you know it, once you're doing it right, there won't be a struggle. You don't see me struggling here. It won't be a struggle once you're doing it properly.
Right.
Still, you still have to do the work. It's it's not like all of a sudden you snap your fingers and they're done. You just still have to be done, but they won't be a labor. Another thing is if you have an edge, let's say you have so we have this apple, and the shadow is here. Let's say the shadow is here. You can put your buffer down the whole way. Yes. This is actually really important. So let's say we have a moderate shadow and a moderate light, and I put my buffer down. My buffer is nice and messy the way it's supposed to be. All right, I make sure it's completely solid. It's got all kind of messy edges. It's shadow on this side, light on this side. When I go in and I start dissolving the edge between the shadow and the buffer, it would be I might do this edge here. Go back and get more paint. So just to there. This. To here. Work here. Stop. And then here. So I might have to break this up into 4 distinctly different pieces in order to create the gradient. If I try to dissolve this edge, it from about here down is going to just be a shit show. It's going to look terrible. The moment that it doesn't blend easily, I wipe my brush and grab paint, come back. Because as I'm doing this, the brush is getting contaminated with both the buffer and the shadow. So I break this down into like 3/4 inch sections. I do the same on the light side when I move over to the lights. Now we're here. Do just a little bit, probably about that far, no more. So I would end here. This will be broken up into 4 parts too, small section. The moment I watch on a line, as I'm breaking up that edge, I'll notice it'll be clean, really nice. Ooh, not so nice. Shit show, shit show, shit show, shit show, da, 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 da. People don't stop here. And then they wonder why their gradients look terrible.
Yeah, I haven't been stopping. I've been like trying to go the whole way and trying to make it.
And it goes very nice. Not too bad. Looking, no. But that's what it is. And it's like, stop. If this was great, go back and redo that here. Go back and redo it here. Small sections. Watch what comes off the brush. Like, you adjust in real time to what you have going on here. That's gonna, again, it's like, you can't just jump in and say, well, I'm doing what I was shown, the way I understand it, and not pay attention to what's actually happening underneath the brush. You're responsible for all of the marks you make. You can't say, well, I was shown to do it this way and it doesn't work. That's cute, it just means you're not doing it right. You've been shown how to do it, now you've got to kind of play with it and make sense of it. Right, and that requires quality control in your work. Again, if you do the top 3/4 of an inch and it's good, and then you go into you continue from there and it starts to become a mess, it should occur to you, well, maybe only a 3/4 of an inch is what I get out of the amount of paint I pick up. Okay, let me clean my brush and let me go back and let's start over again here. Oh, look at that, that works too. Oh, it's a mess again. Okay, I gotta go back to there. Let me get more paint. Just go in and work. Right, but you have to be able to, you have to be agile enough. You have to be paying attention. You have to be agile enough to change as you go, to stop if things aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Don't fight with it. You fight, you're not going to win. You have to outsmart it. right? You're not gonna push this around enough to make a gradient. It's just gonna be a mess after the first 3/4 of an inch. So you outsmart, you say, okay, I got you here, good, I'll stop right there. We'll start over like from the beginning. Oh, there we go. And you just keep doing that. Don't be afraid to like make this, to think of this as part of your painting process. Moving from here to here, and from here to here, is where you're gonna spend most of your time when you paint. Be okay with that. Don't avoid coming back down here, right? You are gonna spend a lot of time back and forth in this transition space, but that's the nature of painting. At some point when you get really good, you'll take your palette and you move it up here so that you're moving much, grab your paint, grab your paint, grab your paint, right? This will
What would you
eliminate.
use to put it up there? That?
Same thing, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Same thing. I mean, it's not liquid, it doesn't go anywhere.
What
Once
are
it's
artists
mixed.
doing when they have like, you know, like the thing?
This is the same thing. It's the same
How
thing.
do you?
Yeah, how do they clean that wooden
Yeah, how do you clean your brush if you
Well-
have a palette in your hand?
palette? How does it?
A lot of the so there are a million ways. You just dip your brush in oil and just kind of, and then like it's not like they have nothing else. They'll have like a bundle of rags, like t-shirts, and they'll just clean the brush in that. They also have, like, you go over to my station over there, you want to count the brushes over there, there's probably 200 brushes. I don't need to clean my brushes while I work.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, I don't need to clean my brushes while I work. I can muddy up 50 brushes and still barely even break the surface of what's over there. And this, another couple of hundred brushes in the drawers down below. I don't need to clean my brushes. I can always put the palette down if I need. But yeah, so, but when you're working, like I said, moving the palette up here is gonna shorten the amount of time back and forth.
And if you have like a really huge painting,
Then it doesn't make a difference. Like, you just work off the table. But if you have something, like when I did illustration, my palette was always taped up here. I would mix here and then I'd move the paint up here. And the reason I do that is I realized that, like, the amount of, I forget, I had done the calculation one time about how many times I reach down in an hour, and how many hours, and how much time it takes each time I do it. And I realized that if I move my palette up here, I would be able to do 2 additional paintings a year without adding any more time to my schedule. Well, in a painting, you could reach down here 5,000 times, 10,000 times. Working on a book cover? Yeah. So you start adding that up, 10 seconds each time, right? You hear, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So you say maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and you do that 10, 15, 20,000 times per painting over 24 paintings. It starts to add up. It starts to add up. You can actually add paintings into your year just by eliminating that 4 or 5 seconds or whatever it is. So, yeah. I'm all about doing it fast, just not sacrificing quality to make it fast. When I did illustration work, speed was important. You get paid for the number of jobs you do. So if you only do 4 jobs, you only get paid for 4 paintings. You do 10 jobs in the same time, you get paid for 10 paintings. So speed mattered. This stuff, when you're learning, you don't want that to be the case. You don't want to worry about speed. You want to take your time and get the education right. Once you know what you're doing, speed's easy. But if you push for speed first, you never really get your feet under you. You're always off balance. And so the quality of your work is always going to suffer. And even if you can get the quality of your work up, your technique is gonna have holes in it, and it's gonna be a lot more challenging than it should be. You see me do this, and it's like, it's effortless, which is how it's supposed to be when it's done right. And it's effortless to me because I'm doing it right. Look at how slow I work. I do, in the Foundation Summer Program, I do a portrait. I do it in 2.5, 3 hours, right? And I sit there the whole time talking, and I'll say things like, well, you've been in foundation class when I do a portrait. You fall asleep on me?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, people fall asleep. I hear them snoring.
no.
But so 3 hours to do a portrait, and it's always like, I make the point, watch how slow I paint, and I'm just like, da, 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 da. And And it's like all of a sudden, it's like you get like 2 hours and 10 minutes in, and you start dropping those lights in, and all of a sudden it's like, bam, it's a painting. And it's like at no point did I rush, at no point did I speed up and try to like, just nice and easy, methodical, slow and steady the whole way through. And what happens is I make no mistakes. A mistake takes like 10 times the amount of time to fix as if you just do it right. So if you take something that takes a minute and you do it wrong, you add 10 minutes to the painting. So if a 1 minute thing, you condense it down to 45 seconds, so you do it nice and quick, you just turned that 1 minute thing into a 10 minute and 45 second exercise. And every place you do that, you add 10 more minutes and 10 more minutes and 10 more minutes. It's just a string of bad decisions. And again, like if you do something, if you make a mark and it's, you're not doing like, you're not shaving off like from 10 seconds down to a tenth of a second, you're going from 10 seconds down to 8 to sacrifice quality, or down to 7. You haven't saved that much time. So, and then in the end, you start tacking on minutes to fix it. And those fixed areas, they never look as good as if you get them right the first time. And so a lot of thinking and just a little bit of painting, so everything goes down where it belongs. And when you first put it down, when you make your gradients, you take your time and manage them properly. It'll feel like it's like they say, like the days are slow, but the years the days are slow, but the years go by fast, right? Same thing here. If you take your time, the strokes and the building up of the painting will feel like it's going very slow. It'll be almost meditative at its pace. But it doesn't take very long when you do that to deliver a finished painting. And what it is there are no mistakes, there are no things you have to go back in and tear apart and put back together and deal with the mess that's created in that. And so the painting process becomes streamlined because there are no mistakes built into it. Or if there are mistakes, they're limited, they're minor.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast?
Yeah, like that.
Smooth is fast?
Yeah, like smooth, like going through it without stopping. Check it.
I'm not sure.
You don't think so?
I'm not sure. But the key is to take your time. Know what you intend to do, and then do it. And make sure that you're balancing out what you're about to do against what you know. Right? There's a calculation in there, right? Because there'll be things that you're not sure. And you have to guess based on what you do know and what you've already done, what you know and what you've experienced. The experience will also guide you to tell you where you should be experimenting for maybe a better result or a faster application. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're doing it not in ignorance, but out of an understanding of what you've already done. I make gradients a million different ways. I make gradients with my fingers if I have to. But the thing, because I understand how they work, it's not the tools, it's not the brush, it's what I have in here. It's how I think. So I can make the gradient, doesn't matter what you give me. You could give me 2 complementary colors, one that's an opaque, one that's transparent, and I can blend them. Silk smooth transition. And I can do it because I understand how it works. It doesn't matter what it is at this point, because it's all the same. Like I say, painting a ball and painting a portrait, it's the same thing. It's shadows, it's lights, it's gradients, reflections, highlights, it's nothing else. The hard part is seeing the portrait for those simple parts. I understand this to the degree that I understand exactly how it works at a microscopic level. It doesn't matter what you give me to create the gradient with, because I understand how it works. All gradients work the same. They all work the same. So if you understand how it works, it doesn't matter what you're blending. Good?